Okay, and now for the final part of the Ogre Showcase. What I have here are my rare choices. And with that, we're going to be coming to an end. So, going to get right into it. The rare choices I have are a Iron Blaster, a Scrap Launcher, and a Slave Giant. And definitely not my favorite slot to paint normally. I did love the Giant, and I had a lot of fun with him, which we'll go over in detail what I was able to get done. But yeah, definitely a really cool model in the center, and a couple of models that, while they look cool, are, in my opinion, they're not fun to paint. Um, but they definitely were different. Maybe the problem was I waited till the end for the two siege weapons, and I should have had them as sort of breaks between ogre units just to have something different to paint. But, it's not like I'm going to do this all again to find out. So, as it stands, this was my least favorite part of the army to get painted, but definitely models I do enjoy. Now, I'm going to pull these off, these two, and I'm going to start with the Iron Blaster. Now, the Iron Blaster is definitely one of the more unique units we get in a army of, some somewhat unique options. This guy here is a cannon that can move and shoot. I think he has a shorter range, I think it's like 36 inches, but he does get to reroll bounces, I want to say, in 8th edition. This is only an 8th edition unit, by the way. I'm sure I could run it as a 6th edition scrap launcher, just a second one. But it would definitely be like oh yeah, this counts as a scrap launcher. It looks close enough. But anyways, this guy here, he's really neat in the way he looks, but is also, in my opinion at least, just a little bit less fun to paint. There wasn't much to do on this guy in a lot of it, because it was fur and straps and just the one ogre. But you do get this really awesome cannon, which is covered in like these scenes from the history of the ogres and the war with the sky giants, the titans in the sky. Definitely neat in that sense. It's definitely unique also in its look, because unlike most ogre stuff, this actually does have like fancy adornments, and that's not something you see on most ogre pieces. So definitely like that part. Building wise, I did build and paint this in sub assemblies just because I don't think you could build this and then give it a proper paint job, especially if you were going to get into really detailing these like little murals, which you definitely could. There's a lot of detail there. I just was not interested in doing that. I wanted to keep with my grungy, dirty army theme, and I didn't think really making that thing shine was going to do that. I did think about maybe, doing a few panel pieces so there'd be color poking through, but just decided that really just, it wasn't quite the look I was going for, although I can definitely see myself maybe going back and then just adding a few dots of color at some point, just as a way to break it up, because it is a bit of a large, dull central section between the cannon and whatever this is, this iron jaw thing. The idea of the model is neat too. It's just kind of this little chariot that's being pulled by this woolly mammoth, not mammoth, but woolly rhino yak thing, and he's just kind of like holding on with these straps up here and just does his thing. Like, as it's 8th edition, It's like the lead belchers where it can just shoot every turn. There's no real downside to this thing. It's not that expensive for the game. It's also not a very expensive model, so I figure in Age of Sigmar this is actually probably a pretty useful piece to have. I've never actually seen the Ogre Battle Tome, so I don't know what it's like in Age of Sigmar, but if it's even remotely like to what cannons are in that edition, where it's just going to do a lot of damage to single models, then it's probably just a really all-around good unit to have, and probably good to fill your what is it, the war machine slot. You get X many war machines. I think this one would be pretty cool. I did have some fun painting this one, I guess, when I think about it, although most of that fun was kind of dirtying it up. I do like to have this sort of really worn look to these guys, as I keep saying, and all the big metal panels really let me get the rust and grime on there. I think one of the unsung heroes of my time painting this army has been Typhus Corrosion. Typhus Corrosion might be sort of the best of the technical paints. The Blood for the Blood God is amazing as far as a good blood effect goes, but Typhus Corrosion has so many uses that I always have to keep some on hand. I've definitely got like a recipe for something similar, which I'll probably show off at some point, but the stuff that GW produces, the consistency of it, I do prefer it. I'm sure at some point I'll figure out, like, you know, I'll make that right final tweak to my recipe, and then it'll be essentially the same. And at that point, you know, that'll be the end of buying GW stuff. But until I do perfect it, the one I make is just better for dirtying up large volume pieces like buildings or like super heavy tanks, things like that. So for small units, though, getting in just with a dry brush and dabbing this everywhere, it really does add a good layer of lived-in detail. The dude, pretty much just a standard ogre with some scraps of shrapnel sticking out of him. But yeah, it's definitely a cool model. I can see why people like this one, but it just wasn't as fun to paint the whole way through. But the biggest part of my painting troubles came from this guy. This is the scrap launcher, the Noblar scrap launcher, and if you are not familiar with them, this one is the pewter, the original. So this entire thing is pewter other than the base, and it might be the worst model I've ever constructed in my life. I am not certain how this came out of the studio and got greenlit without like them just accepting they had to put a warning on the box, which they did not. I talked about how apprehensive I was in building and painting this back when I showed off the unboxing of it, and I was absolutely right. This thing was just an ongoing nightmare from start to finish, and by the end I just wanted it to finish. I was tired of anytime I touched it because of its massive weight. You know, too much holding it by the base. I risked the glue separating that was attaching it to the base. That happened one time, which led to a bunch of chipping and a couple of pieces busting off. And then I would try to hold certain areas, and then I would just have a bunch of chipping because, you know, you're touching a pewter model that you're painting and you haven't sealed it yet. Oh, sorry, I kicked my camera. My camera stand. Yeah, if you've not done pewter models, some of them are great. You know, you take a pewter Cadian, he's one piece. The pewter is quite detailed, but because it's from the the olden days of Games Workshop, they're not as detailed as newer models, which kind of gives you a chance to not worry so much about all the little tiny things you might be missing. But this guy, he's so many pieces. I want to say it was like 30 something pieces in total, and getting them all to stay exactly where you want them. I did not bother with the hey, put them here instructions part for most of it, other than just like the frame. But the Noblars, other than the little guy up here, he's the only one I actually made sure he was in his right spot, just because he's straddling the arm of the catapult. I painted this again in sub-assemblies, even more. Like basically almost every piece was on its own. As I finished it, I was building those sub-assemblies into larger. Actually, I didn't even start with sub-assemblies. I painted it as pieces and then built them into sub-assemblies and painted them some more. And then I started building those things into this contraption. I mean, I can't even stress how weird this is. I'm afraid I'm even going to break something off just by holding it to show you. I mean, there is so much going on here. Now, thankfully, I've had a chance to varnish him. And, in the springtime when I can get him outside with a rattle can, I'm going to spray my matte sealant on him just to dull it down. But for now, this is good enough. I'll take a glossy Rhinox over one that chips every time I touch him. And these beams, I mean, they were chipping almost every time. Rubbing up against these knoblarps, they were chipping. The best I found to hold this, if you ever are building this model and you haven't sealed it yet, when you're holding it, this is what I suggest, is like this to paint until you need to move it, at which point I would hold it around here if you think you have it nice and sturdy. If you don't, it will just crumble and fall apart. I mean, this is, again, this is the most frustrating model I have ever built in my life. I've built a lot of models, not just Warhammer, into, model cars and tanks and ships. And this thing here, just, I don't even understand. It looks really flavorful. It's a cool piece, but honestly, I look at this and I look at the trouble I had with it, with, at this point, 30 years of modeling experience. And I don't understand how they said, yeah, we should release this. I've had pewter models where I said, wow, I mean, this is kind of hard to build, but there is no way a young hobbyist who was not familiar with pewter was going to put this thing together well, because the instructions, for one, are some of the worst I have ever seen. In fact, I'm going to grab them right now. They're just right here. They are a single sheet of paper. And they look like this. You get a picture of the final product. I referred to this picture and the picture in the 6th edition Army book so many times, because then you flip it over and you get this, for those who haven't seen the unboxing. And it's straightforward enough, but the pictures are black and white and they are small. This is not a very, big piece of paper. As you can see, that's my hand going over it. And most of it looks like it's, pretty straightforward where it goes, but some of it turns out it's not. These dotted lines are maybe pointing to the wrong spots, or are not as clear about what they're actually pushing into. You're looking for slots and peg holes, and they're just not there. I don't know if mine was badly cast, which is another possibility. I won't even take that away as an option, because it really could be. But also, it's heavy. By the time you are finished step 2, you have basically everything but these chains and this arm and like a platform back here. This like catapult arm. Basically everything is on him by then, except he's not there. You're just like holding this bunch of rickety pewter together in your hand, trying to make sure it doesn't fold in on itself. And then you're just trying to prop it up on the Rhinox, which they show as step 3. But no, that is step 1. You get him finished so that you can prop this thing up on him as you build it. That was the only way I was able to get this. I don't get it. This was such a brutally difficult model to build, and I have no doubt that is why I got the model so cheap. I got about $40 Canadian for a sealed box, and I assume that's because nobody bought this thing after a little bit. I never saw anybody who owned one that I can remember. I remember looking at them back in 6th edition when I first played Ogres and saying that they're neat, but being concerned that I wouldn't be able to build it. And I'm right. There's no way I would have been able to build it. I think this thing just didn't sell, and that's why we had literally, I want to say we got from 6th to 8th, we got the Fire Belly was new. The Fire Belly was new, the Iron Blaster was new, and it was a dual kit with the scrap launcher. And I'm positive this thing, didn't go to Finecast just because they never wanted to try to sell this again. This is one of the few cases where if Finecast was an option, I would have jumped on Finecast. Because at least with Finecast, they don't weigh enough to be pulling themselves apart. And I could easily just make a small hole for a small amount of pinning. Versus like this thing would have taken like 60, maybe 70 pinning holes because of all the different pieces. And just, it's together. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because this video it's already 17 minutes, and this model, I mean, it looks cool. It's got all those splashes of Noblar green everywhere. I threw the colors on. And it is a cool looking model. It's exactly what you think a Noblar construction should look like, but I would never suggest this model to anybody. Unless you are, I don't know, trying to prove a point or something. And if you can do this better than me, like, good for you. Like, I would not even care if somebody said, oh, well, check out this video of me putting this together with my eyes closed and, a thing of just the worst glue possible, and it was so easy. That's great for you. This thing was not easy to build, and I would never recommend it, no matter how cool it looks compared to the new one. The new one is pretty bland by comparison, but I don't know. This thing looks like it's Goblin Hewer weird to build, but like worse than the Goblin Hewer. I think it's the best way to put it. I don't have a Goblin Hewer to show off or talk about, but everyone should look up the Goblin Hewer if they don't know what that is. The Goblin Hewer is another wild one. So yeah, onto this guy, the Giant. Now, with him, I did get to go a little wild. It is just the newest Giant sculpt, minus the Gargantuans or whatever the big ones for Age of Sigmar are. When 6th edition came out with Ogres, they were still using the pewter Giants and customizing them. And while they're great models, like all the pewter Giants are really great models. There's a few. This guy here, though, this is a cool model. I've always loved the Giant. This is the second one I've owned. The first one, I never really used it. And I think I gave it away at one point. But I had a lot of fun coming back to it. Especially where he's the slave giant. So because he's a slave giant, I decided that he was up in the mountains and he was going to have the Mark of Chaos and have this like weird fused finger issue. I also decided that he was a bit of a troublemaker, and so his masters, they caged him up. If I can get a better. Yeah, they caged him up because he was always biting. And this way here, they can just push the meat in to help him eat. And obviously, it's a bunch of sticks, so obviously like, he could break this, but it's also fantasy, so it's fine. He's just got this standard cool ogre axe club thing that is just a bunch of weapons driven through a log. I've got the chains added to help reinforce that cage. These are jeweler's chains. Well, a jeweler chain, just kind of cut to size. And yeah, like this guy here, I had fun painting him. I had fun doing little extra bits of, customization I did with him. And I like this model. This is a fun model, not just the one that I made, which I'm quite proud of, but the entire, just the idea of this kit. I love this kit, and I'm glad they included it in the Ogre Boxed Army last year. Definitely a nice piece. On the table, not super great, and not sure how much I'll use him in, smaller games, but as a way to fill out 3,000 points, I think a giant's really fun. It's super flavorful, and it gives you a chance to take that giant great name, giant tamer or beater or something, to prove how tough your tyrant was. And yeah, there's not much else to say about this guy. I mean, everybody should be fairly familiar with him by now. This kit came out 14 or 15 years ago, I think, maybe even a little bit longer. It might have been 2006, in which case we're at 16 years. Wow, that's a long time if that's correct. But if you're doing an ogre army, I suggest a slave giant, because you do get to really just kind of customize one thing and do something more fun with it and make it personal to your army. And I think the giant's great for that, not just because of what it is in the army, but because of the size of it. So thanks very much for watching, and if you have any thoughts or suggestions, leave them in the comments, and everybody have a great day.